first place Phillies, I should say. Scott Lauber covers the Phillies, Philly.com. Kind enough to join us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as the Phillies getting ready for the second half of the season. We'll take a look at, do they have the staying power to make this happen? Scott, no Machado, it looks like anyway. So if they don't get that major move, is this team in it for the long haul?
Well, they're in it for the long haul for sure. But your question right off the top, do they have what it takes to close the deal and win the division, remains to be seen. It's interesting. So I was talking to Freddie Freeman in the National League clubhouse yesterday, and, the Braves feel very similar to the way the Phillies do in that no one expected them to be in this position at the All-Star break. They're a half a game out of first place, and everyone was kind of waiting for them to fade. They haven't faded. They were not mentioned among the teams that were a finalist for Manny Machado. And, while they're also looking to make improvements, it's probably going to be, well, at least they think it's going to be maybe more on the fringes, right, of their roster. And he was sort of saying, the way they look at it in Atlanta is that it's a three-team race. No one's counting out the Nationals yet. And I think that's really kind of what fueled the Phillies in their pursuit of Machado, was that they looked at this and they said not only are they in first place, but they're 5.5 games ahead of Washington. Maybe the Nats just don't fire this year. I mean, we've seen that happen before. A couple of years ago, everyone was sort of waiting for them to come around. It just didn't happen. This division looks really, really winnable, way more winnable than I think either the Phillies or the Braves imagined it would be. And the Nationals are lurking there, but, you look at it and you say, well, if you can make a major move, it could really put you over the top. Machado was the major move that the Phillies could have made. And, I think now if he's headed to L.A., that, what you're looking at is probably trying to get better in other ways. I was actually just looking at it, and, right field is an area where their production has been pretty poor overall. A lot of that has to do with Altair and how he hasn't had the year that most people thought he would. But if you could pick off maybe an outfielder who you could put in right field, and that would move Nick Williams back to maybe a bench role, and it would help your bench out, that's a way to get better. You can always add another reliever. You could always add a veteran starter. So there are other ways to maybe improve. Machado would have been the biggest one, but I think if Machado's headed to L.A., as it looks like he is, then the Phillies have 2 weeks to kind of figure out, well, all right, we can't address our major area of need, which is offense from the shortstop position, so where else can we get better? And I think they'll look to do that.
Scott Lauber is with us here, Philly.com. The Inquirer, the Daily News, covers the Phillies. Yeah, I mean, offensively, they need some help, right? We all agree on that they probably need another bat to, because if they're 53 and 42, first place, but if there was a run coming up that, maybe hindered them, is it because they don't score enough runs? Is that what would be the biggest problem this team has the second half of the year?
Yeah, look, that's what stands out to me. I mean, we can talk all we want about, Cole Hamels or Jay Happ or, adding another piece to the bullpen like Zach Britton. And you could make a solid case to do any of those things. But at the end of the day, it doesn't solve the fact that they are at least one, I think two, bats short in their lineup of being a really kind of scary offense. They have the kind of offense that, I think can be shut down. You saw it happen last weekend in Miami, of all places, where they just didn't score against a team that they should score against. They are a hitter short. So if it's not going to be Machado, I think people are going to sort of pivot to Mike Moustakas or Adrian Beltre, and those are big names, and those are guys who've been productive hitters over their careers. They are third basemen, though, and as much as Michael Franco can be sort of, you pick the adjective, enigmatic, infuriating, maddening, to kind of watch the ups and downs.
Those are good.
He's not the biggest problem in their lineup. I think if you remove him from your lineup and you add in Moustakas or Beltre, I don't know overall how much better you are. I really think that, if you can find maybe somebody, as I said, to play right field, or, that's why, for any number of reasons, Machado was a really good fit for them. because he's a shortstop, and shortstop's been an area where they have a really, really kind of glaring need for more offense. So, I think that they're going to have to kind of look at all the different areas where they can improve in their lineup and maybe come up with now a creative solution because, the one that made the most sense is off the board.
Yeah, Scott, I mean, I guess they're playing a Kingery at short. If they were to – you mentioned shortstop as a problem area where they would like to maybe get more production. What happens with J.P. Crawford when he comes back? Does he go back to third? Because I think that weakens their offense even more. Do they put him at short? What happens to Kingery? I mean, that seems to be a very interesting conundrum coming up.
Really interesting. And, if you were not in contention, I think it would be easy. You'd say, all right, well, Crawford comes off the DL. He plays third base. You let Kingery stay at shortstop. You watch them both develop. You see how that goes. And then you make a decision in the offseason about which position, third or short, you need to really upgrade at. That's not the case. They're playing meaningful games, and they will be through August and into September. So I'm not sure that you could just wait for J.P. Crawford to come off the DL, plug him into the lineup, and sit back and see what happens. I think, they're in a position where I think they need to be a little bit more proactive in terms of figuring out ways to get better offensively. That said, it doesn't help you make any decisions on Crawford or Kingery going forward. I mean, I think, look, if they had gotten Machado, I think what that does is it puts Kingery back in kind of that utility role where he sort of started the season. He can stay on the big league roster. He can play here and there. You're still gonna get a look at him, but you're gonna upgrade in an area where you severely need to upgrade. And now it's unclear what happens. I mean, let's say you trade for Mike Moustakas. He becomes your third baseman. Now you've got three guys, Kingery, Crawford, and Franco, who you've got to make decisions on, and you're not going to see all three of them on a consistent daily basis. So these are conversations that are happening in their front office right now in terms of how to approach the final 2.5 months of the season and still make good decisions on players they need to make decisions about.
Scott, do you think because a lot of teams, this time of the year might have a call-up, someone that can give them a little help, a jolt. Do they have someone waiting in the wings that maybe can help this team out?
Offensively, I don't see it. I just feel like, if you're talking about a young player who could come in and possibly give you a jolt, maybe, J.P. Crawford would be the closest thing you've got to that coming off the DL at some point later in the season. So, and from an offensive standpoint, he hasn't done anything to make you think that he could come up and give you that kind of jolt. So, no, I think if they're going to add more offense, it's going to have to come externally, and I think that they may have to look. A guy who's interesting to me is Nicholas Castellanos in Detroit. He might get traded. He's played third base. He's not an especially good defensive third baseman, but he also plays the outfield. He could maybe go to right field for you. Is a guy who's been a proven bat in the past. So I don't know. I think that they're going to probably cast a wide net in the final 2 weeks before the deadline, see what they can come up with. And, we know that they haven't put all their eggs in the Machado basket. I mean, they weren't operating under the assumption that they were just going to get this guy. They knew that they had competition from the Dodgers and the Brewers. The Yankees dabbled in this for a little while, and anytime the Yankees dabble in anything, you've got to take them seriously. So it wasn't like the Phillies said, well, it's Machado or bust. So they obviously had their plans B, C, D, and E, and I think now they'll pivot to that, and we'll sort of see over the next 2 weeks who they target and who they pinpoint as guys who can help them from an offensive standpoint.
What is the plan with Eichhoff?
He's in a holding pattern, as I understand it, and this is a question for Gabe Kapler as soon as they come back from the break because, I believe right before the All-Star break he'd been shut down again, so I think that they're kind of back to figuring out. I think he'd felt some of that tingling in his fingers that he felt earlier that led to that longer shutdown. So, that's a question certainly to ask when they get back. It's to be honest with you, for me at least, it's sort of slipped through the cracks a bit with all this Machado stuff. And
right.
But yeah, I think at this point, now we're into the middle of July. He hasn't pitched yet. Anytime he's tried to pitch in the minor leagues, he's had a setback. So to the degree that they were counting on having him at all, I don't know that you can really make that calculation now. I think you've got to look at it and go, well, let's figure out why he's having this problem, try to get it fixed, and see if you can get him right for next year.
Scott Lauber is the Phillies reporter for the Inquirer, the Daily News, Philly.com. He's at Scott Lauber on Twitter. Now, Scott, you wrote a piece about a month ago regarding the unconventional bullpen approach. Has it become more conventional with Pat Neshek, or is it still a night-to-night scenario for Gabe Kapler?
I feel like it's still a night-to-night scenario. I feel like when Aaron Nola goes 7 innings and leaves the game, I'm always sort of thinking to myself, all right, who's going to get the final 6 outs tonight? Sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes, it's Velasquez leaving in the 5th or 6th, and you're like, well, how do they get through the final 3 or 4 innings? And so, look, I think I think you can figure out the guys they trust the most out there. Certainly Sir Anthony Dominguez is still kind of what I call their relief ace. The guy who's going to pitch in the highest leverage situations late in the game, whether that's the 7th, 8th, or 9th. Seems like they trust Neshek, they trust Adubre Ramos. I think because of the track record, more so than the performance, they trust Tommy Hunter to some degree. That's going to make fans cringe, I know, but I think that they do put some stock into what he's done throughout his career, not just this season. So, I think that there are certainly guys. Victor Arano is a guy who's pitched in a lot of bigger spots lately, it feels like, and maybe he's a guy who's sort of climbing that ladder of guys they trust. They really do trust late in games. But you still don't know for sure who's got the 7th, 8th, and 9th on any given night. And I think that, I think we've talked about this, it's sort of Gabe Kapler's ideal bullpen, because most of those guys we talked about are guys who haven't been pegged to a certain role throughout their careers. They're too young for that. They haven't been around long enough to say, well, I'm a 7th inning guy or I'm a 9th inning guy. And so he can sort of use them and be a little bit more flexible with them than he could with, if he had, say, Craig Kimbrell, who doesn't particularly love coming in before the 9th inning of the game. He can do that more with Sir Anthony Dominguez because he's more of a blank slate. So, no, I still think that that it's kind of a role-less bullpen, for lack of a better way to say it, although the pecking order is clear in terms of who they trust late in the game. You're probably not going to see, unless they're really strapped because of what happened the night before, you're probably not going to see, for instance, a guy like, I don't know, Yaxel Rios close a whole lot of games down the stretch, because I just don't think I don't think he's in that he slots into that part of the game for them. But you could see any number of other guys, whether it's Dominguez, Ramos, Neshek, Adam Morgan against the tough lefties. So, I really think that that's kind of the way they've operated their bullpen, and it's the way that they've continued to do it.
Scott, it's Arrieta's going to get the first ball when they come back from the break, according to your tweet anyway. Velasquez, yeah. Pivetta, and then I guess it will go to maybe De Los Santos if Eflin's not ready, and then Nola. If they made a deal for a Happ or a Hamels or both, who are the odd guys out of the rotation?
It's a great question. I thought the last week of the season was really interesting. You had De Los Santos come up and make that spot start against the Mets and pitch pretty well. And then the next 2 nights, you had Velasquez and Pivetta in that order against the Mets and the Orioles, both pitch very well. And I don't think that was a coincidence. I think that both of them saw De Los Santos do what he did, and I think both of them felt like they needed to step up, and I think both of them did. And so it got very quiet all of a sudden heading into the final weekend of the first half in terms of like, well, De Los Santos can come up and stay, because Velasquez and Pivetta had kind of shut things up. And then De Los Santos didn't pitch all that well on Sunday in Miami. So, it looks like the top 5 are who they are, assuming Eflin and the blister issue are cleared up. And if you were to go out and find a Cole Hamels or a J Happ and acquire them, you'd be moving somebody to the bullpen. Everyone always looks at Vince Velasquez, right? Because they say, well,
sure,
he's got the velocity and he's a guy who for short bursts looks like he could be really, really effective out of the bullpen. But honestly, I think he's pitched probably better, or at least a little bit more consistently over the past 5 or 6 weeks than Pivetta has. I just don't know. And that's why I think that starting pitching is really a distant third in terms of their priority list. if you're going to say offense, bullpen, or rotation, what do you need the most? I think the rotation's probably on the back burner, at least for me. I also don't think that Hamels or Happ are going to make that big of a difference at this point, where you could say, well, look, it's not a huge need for us, but it's an area we can get better. I don't really know if you're going to get all that much better with those two guys. You might feel a little bit more like, well, there's a proven track record there and all that. Maybe they don't, maybe they hold up better down the stretch in a playoff race, but I really, I think offense has got to be their priority at the deadline, and offense to me. The more bats you can get, even if it's a right fielder and a shortstop who don't light you up in terms of well, they're a huge name, but they're an upgrade over what you have, you got to go do it, because I think that's the bigger priority for me than trying to figure out, the fact that we're talking about, we don't have a clear-cut answer for who would come out of the rotation tells you that, it's really not that big a need.
Obviously, Machado, there is a little bit of a snag, but the feeling would be that he's going to land in Los Angeles. Okay, if not him, are there – you mentioned Moustakas for third, but shortstop's a spot. Eduardo Escobar is a guy that's kind of interesting, I guess, but are there other names that you would be intrigued by that play the positions that the Phillies have a need for? Because third base, you mentioned, I mean, Franco's one of the more productive guys they have, and yet they seemingly want to get rid of him.
Yeah, no, incredibly. I don't know if that's a statement on the rest of the offense or the fact that maybe he's having a better year than we've given him credit for. I think that the hot streaks have been really hot, and it's made up for the fact that it seems as though he kind of disappears for weeks on end. But, yeah, it's really interesting because, like I said, if you go for a Moustakas or a Beltre, then that would seemingly pull Franco out of the lineup, and we could argue that they're not a whole heck of a lot stronger that way. Escobar is interesting. I asked a scout about him yesterday, and I was told that that particular scout was saying that he likes the player, but he doesn't really know if he's a shortstop much anymore. Maybe fits better at third base. So I don't know. I mean, if that's your hang up on Escobar, but you feel like he's an offensive upgrade, maybe you take the defensive hit, and go that way. They might just be that hard up for a hitter that they have to do something like that. So he's having a really nice year. He's a free agent at the end of the year, so he'd be a rental, wouldn't cost you very much. He's a name that I think I would pay some attention to. Asdrubal Cabrera is an interesting name to me. I don't know if he can play shortstop anymore, but he's having a nice year for the Mets offensively, and he's probably going to get moved. I don't know if he can play shortstop. I don't think he's done it in a while. So, but that's a name to maybe kind of keep your eye on. And I think it's worth kind of looking at the outfield market as well. As I mentioned, right field has kind of been an area where Nick Williams has been productive lately, in particular, it feels like. But overall, the numbers in right field are not good, and the bench has not been great. So if you could move Williams back to the bench where he was very productive before he became an everyday guy again, maybe Adam Jones might get moved, or Curtis Granderson might get moved, or there are veteran guys who have a track record, who played on winning teams, who are good character guys who might be an asset to you. Again, like I said, they're not going to give you the boost that Machado would have, but maybe they are, if they're used correctly. Maybe they are creative ways to get better, or subtler ways to get better than going out and getting Manny Machado. So, like I said, I think they're going to cast a wide net here for hitters and figure out, is there a right-handed hitting outfielder who we could platoon with Nick Williams in right field and make right field stronger? Is there a shortstop who, even if he's not the best defensive guy in the world, will be an offensive upgrade over what they're getting right now out of Kingery and what they had been getting out of Crawford? These are questions that they're going to have to ask themselves in the next 2 weeks and figure out if they can make a move that makes sense that's going to be an upgrade.
I'll leave you with this, Scott. I know you wrote a front-page piece about Nola and the curveball and how that kind of changed everything for him with his changeup, and now he's turned into, the guy we saw last night getting Mike Trout out, pitching in the All-Star game. You were there. Just kind of take us inside Nola's night and how cool it was for him.
Yeah, it was really cool. Aaron Nola, anyone who's ever seen an interview with him or had the chance to speak to him, I kind of say this. I say this totally as jokingly, but it's true. You almost get the sense as you're talking to the guy that he might fall asleep while he's speaking. I mean, he's a really low key guy. He's like even keeled, like the definition of even keeled. Doesn't show a whole lot of emotion. And I went over to him after the game last night in the clubhouse, and I asked him what it was like, and he had a huge smile on his face, and he was talking about the hitters that he faced, specifically Betts, Altuve, and Trout. If there are three better hitters in the American League, I don't know who they are. And so he faced the best you can possibly face. He struck out Betts. He got Trout to pop out. These are things he'll be talking about for a while, I think. But then I asked him about, something I noticed when I looked down at the dugout after he left the game. It seemed like he kind of plopped himself down next to Zach Greinke, and they were talking for quite some time, several innings, the two of them sort of sitting next to each other. And Nola was talking about what an awesome experience that was and how smart Greinke is. And they were talking about everything under the sun from I'm sure that they were, sort of talking shop a bit, but he said that Greinke was also talking about hitting with him and stuff like that. And, I think that's the cool part of all of this for Aaron Nola. He's 25 years old. It was his first chance to be in an All-Star game, and he gets a chance to sit there and pick the brains of some of the best guys in the business, guys who have won Cy Young Awards, guys who've had multiple years like the one Nola's having now. And that's really cool, and I think that that's something that he'll bring back with him and take with him. And I could sort of tell. I mean, I've been back here now covering the Phillies for just a few months. I don't know Aaron Nola as well as some of the other writers who cover the team, but I know him enough, I think, to know that meant a lot to him last night. He had a great time, and I think he's just going to kind of be. It's just another thing that he can sort of now put in his tool bag and say, well, now I've done this and here's what I got out of it, and I'm going to be better for it. So, it was pretty cool kind of talking to him Monday before it all started, and you could sort of tell that, he was just going to kind of keep his eyes and ears open and absorb it all. And then talking to him last night when it was over, and you could just sort of tell that he really did sort of take advantage of that experience. So I thought it was pretty cool to see that from him. And performance aside, and the performance was incredible. Just the whole entire atmosphere. He used that word a lot, atmosphere. He said to me, he goes, look, I've never been in the playoffs, but I would imagine this is what it's like. Packed house, big crowd, really loud, especially Monday night at the Home Run Derby. And so I think to go through an experience like that is great for him, and I think he's going to be better for it.
I know you were here in 06, 7, 8.
Yeah.
When did you leave for Boston? 10. So you were here for the good times.
Yeah.
Are you a Utley to the Hall guy?
I am. Yeah, I wrote about it the other day, and look, I say I am. That's kind of my gut, my first kind of impulse to say that. We have. I made the point in the column that I wrote. He won't be on an All-Star ballot until 2023, and so
Hall of Fame ballot.
We're going to have time. Hall of Fame ballot, right? So we're going to have time to kind of look at the numbers, delve deeper. I know a lot of voters are going to get hung up on the fact that he won't finish his career with 2,000 hits, and it's been a while since a guy's gotten into the Hall of Fame with less than 2,000 hits. But I saw him at his peak. I feel like I saw him in truly his prime, and I felt like he was the best player at his position for a solid 7, 8, 9 years, and to me that's Hall worthy. So the eye test for me says yes. I think that people are going to say, well, he never finished in the top 5 in MVP voting, and he never won a Gold Glove, and he didn't get 2,000 hits, and that's all well and good. But I tend to think that if you look at the player and you consider what he meant to his team, how he dominated his position, I think he checks a lot of those boxes. To me, Utley is going to be a great sort of sabermetric versus old school stat argument. I think a lot of the old school guys are going to probably err on the side of no. a lot of the more sabermetrically inclined people who look at WAR and things like that are going to say yes. So there's going to be a lot of time to decide, but I'm certainly a yes leaner right now.
And he needs to get in the Hall to get his number retired, or the Phillies going to waive that for someone like him.
I would waive it. I would. I mean, how can you not, right?
Yeah. Well, you got him, Rollins, and Howard. I don't see – personally, I'm not sure that any of them get into the Hall, but they got to get their numbers on the wall, right?
Oh, I would think so.
Retired.
I mean, look, Howard probably has the weakest case of the three. I think we can all agree that he's not a Hall of Famer, but what he meant to the franchise – he'll be in the Phillies Hall of Fame, and I think look, every team has different standards, right, about how they want to do this. I know, covering the Red Sox, I know for years and years and years, the thing was you had to spend your whole career with the Red Sox and be in the Hall of Fame. They relaxed that now for Pedro, and they've relaxed it because he wasn't there his whole career, and they relaxed it for Ortiz, who started with the Twins, and I think the first guy that they relaxed that rule for was Carlton Fisk. So they've kind of gotten away from that, and in time I think the Phillies will too. I don't think that those two things are, or even one of those two things is criteria for number retirement.
All right, Scott, I appreciate staying on a couple extra minutes here as the Phillies get ready to start the second half against the Padres. Jake Arrieta will be on the bump. First place Phillies start the second half Thursday night. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, Scott.
You bet. Anytime.